Hi, this is Dan here. I hope you're doing really well today. In this bass lesson, I'm talking about bass guitar technique and how you can make yours really consistent. It's quite basic stuff, but elevating those basics so that you can play some quite intricate lines. I was using G major in that intro, like, you know. That's G major pentatonic. I'm going to get into that stuff, the shapes and the notes that you can use perhaps to work on this stuff a bit later. But first I want to talk about fretting. You have to be completely consistent in how you fret on a bass. As you know, the frets are wider down this end of the bass, so it's a little bit more taxing on the hands. The stretch has to be a bit bigger, but up here it gets a little easier because the frets get narrower. But let's just talk about that. So there's a place that you really should be fretting, otherwise you'll get that. If you ever get that, that's obviously a terrible sound. And that's because if we take, for example, G on the 3rd fret of the E string, you want to fret just next to the fret. And I know this sounds really basic and you probably already know this, but there's just a few things you want to avoid, which I do see a lot. Let's move to actually the G on the 5th fret of the D string. So our finger should be pretty curled, you know, not straight and not collapsed like this, but quite nice and curled like this, okay? And this is the 5th fret of the D string, and you want to be not on top of the fret, just next to it, just behind it. Now, when you press down into the fretboard, you don't want to press too hard. That's just a waste of energy. And equally, you don't want to press so light that you don't get a sound. So this is going to be different for everyone, but you've got to find your touch, find the pressure that works for you, but certainly don't go beyond where you get a decent note. So you want to be fretting into the fretboard and not, as I sometimes see, dragging the fret down or even pushing it up. The finger comes down and it pushes through right into the fretboard, and that's how you get a note. And that's really, any finger should be doing that. Should be not on that side of the fret. So this is a D on fret 7 of the G string. So I'm right by the 7th fret. Any closer to the 6th and it will get that sound. So you really want to be consistent with that. Like I say, not dragging down. If you do that, that's a bend. And that is a technique, and you need to be able to know when to do that. So if I'm going, you need to be deliberate with your technique. If you're fretting and you're plucking, well, any technique really, even slap, the place where you fret is going to be important, and not dragging down unless you want to bend. Before I move on to plucking technique, and I am primarily dealing with that in this lesson, I just want to touch on hand shift. So if I play like this, I did 2 shifts there. And that is an integral part of bass playing. You'll be moving around a lot, and you have to keep that consistency of playing, fretting a note behind that fret wherever you go. You know, sometimes you might go like this. You know, your finger isn't quite in the right place. Everyone has different hand sizes. Everyone has different basses with different scale lengths, different string gauges. You work hard on your own thing, and you will find the different gaps that your fingers need to maintain on your bass, and it does change in different places. Like I say earlier, it's wider there and the fret distances get narrower here. But the more you practice this kind of thing and force yourself out of, say, one position, so I'm going up the neck here, I'm always aiming when I'm practicing to fret in the correct place. I will introduce the shapes now, actually. So I'm going to put a little PDF link down below to these shapes, and I'm improvising with this, and in that little situation just there, this is one of these lessons that I do that are, there's no written example, it's just me making stuff up to illustrate a point, okay? So here, I'm just going along the G string, and that allows me to work on shifting. So 3 notes at a time. And that kind of thing. Like, I'm not getting any buzzers there. The notes are in tune because I'm not dragging them down. Sometimes you can accidentally pull downwards on the G string and get that. I don't know if that's ever happened to you. It's happened to me a few times. If you get that consistency in your practice, your technique will be the same every time and you won't get that. If you want to bend on a G string, you've got to go in this direction. Let's talk about plucking. So when you're plucking, there are a couple of things to have in mind. I'm doing alternate plucking here, so I've got my index and middle always, if I play a D string, going index, middle, index, middle. Sometimes you will start with the middle, that's fine. Go middle, index, middle, index. And sometimes you will not do religiously alternate plucking, that's also fine. But here I'm really trying to keep it as alternate as possible. Now where you pluck matters, because if I got the back here towards the bridge of the bass, I've got this P pickup and this J pickup blended equally. But if I go to the back, I can get a bit of a punchier sound, and if I go a bit more to the neck, I can get a bit more of a warmer, rounded sound, and in the middle it's sort of somewhere in between. I quite like to go there when I'm playing rock, because I can just attack the string slightly differently, perhaps get a bit of the string hitting against those frets. Now that works for me. Now watch what I do. If I just move here, if I'm playing in a rock style, I'm deliberately starting the pluck from quite high up to get an aggressive attack on the string. Otherwise, I personally, this is all personal preference, I prefer to be a bit more economical in my movements. A bit of a lighter touch is good. But look what I'm doing here, and what I suggest you try as well, is you've got the fleshiest part of the fingertip, and really try to pluck the string from there. So I guess you're going starting a bit further down the finger. It's kind of weird to analyze what you do automatically, but that's what's going on there. And again, it's not coming away unless you want that. It's just to get a nice tone. The angle of your fingers quite straight. But if I alternate now, the index and the middle, they're equal in volume. Okay, I don't want one of them to be louder again, unless I want that in playing ever. Okay, but I want to keep them consistent, both in timing and tone. If I go to the C 3rd fret A string, I'm resting on the string below it. Okay, I'm not playing on the side of my finger. The hand position has got to be optimal for a good tone. That's kind of, well, if you look, this is sort of what I do. You can of course use the 3rd finger as well, but for most people, most of the time you'll be just doing index, middle. Now that's the fretting hand and the plucking hand, and then really it's all about coordinating them and making sure that they're both playing in the correct place, but also bang in time. That's really important. Right, I'd like to move on to how you actually work on this. So we now know roughly what our fretting hand should be doing, what our plucking hand should be doing. How do we work on this? And so the little exercise that I was doing in the intro and that I'm demoing in this lesson is just making stuff up, in this case in the key of G major, you know. I'm actually thinking Bach, you know, kind of. I'm thinking classical music. I'm thinking to keep the notes really long and legato into each other. That's what I'm doing for this particular thing. Now, I've got a load of free bass guitar exercises on my website. I'll put a link to that down below. I've also got a book, should you want to go a little bit deeper into exercises. But I often do something like this. I've got these shapes and I'm just exploring, really trying to get the timing timing, technique, tone, those three things together. You know, I want to be really consistent. There, it was quite good. I didn't get any of those. Sometimes it happens. There, I got a buzz. You know, this is sort of real-time practice. You want to practice and work out what's going wrong where and how you can change that, okay? So that's just one example of how you might practice this. Let me demo that with the drum beat in the background, and I told you I was going quite Bach-esque there. I might change that. Let's have a listen. Yes, I went a little bit more into a bass line and I was using G major pentatonic there. When I'm playing a bit like that, I can't be worried about my technique. I can't be worried about perhaps getting that sound. That's why you practice, of course, is to get your technique so good that it's automatic. And there I'm really concentrating on keeping in the groove, playing around with the major pentatonic shapes in this case. You know, when you do work on your technique enough, and there I'm doing slides now. That's a hammer on. But how I'm plucking and where and how I'm fretting is no different from what I was telling you before. That's a very consistent thing that you need to get going. I know a lot of the stuff I'm saying in this lesson is obvious, but I just thought this was something I was practicing last night, and I thought this would be a good thing to share with you. The kind of thing I practice so that I don't have to think about it. I think that's useful. Okay, I'd like to finish with muting techniques, and there are a ton of different ones. I have got a video that goes into it in a little more detail, but in that video it's what I'll show you now. So if I'm playing on the, well, anything other than the E string, I might rest my thumb on that E string. So I started off with the thumb perhaps anchored on the pickup here. My hand, or wrist rather, is kind of resting here. Hand plonks down naturally here. And then look, I've moved to there. Sometimes I'll do this floating thumb technique where you get your thumb sort of the side of it and you use it as a mute here. So there, the E and the A are muted. I'm now on the D and the G strings. And at no point are you thinking about this in the moment. You just work on these techniques enough that they become automatic. There's a couple of other things I'll need to play to then work out what I'm doing. Right, even that. Right there. I ended up on a G on the D string, the 5th fret. Okay, this is a very, look what's happening here. My hand, I'm pressing down on that fret with like the crease, the first crease, not the fingertip here. I'm also deliberately touching the G string with the first finger, and I'm also holding the E and the A strings with the longer fingers that aren't being used. Okay, so the 2nd, the 3rd, and the 4th. Not to touch the D string, because that has to be ringing in this case. But muting is all about getting a part of your hand or a part of your finger on either hand and stopping a note. It sounds a bit complicated, but it has to happen because there's a horrible tonal thing happens where you are playing a note and you hear other notes. Like if you played an E flat and you were accidentally hitting an E, that's not good. So here, I'm now putting my thumb on the A string, backing onto the E. I'm going to go back to G major just because the whole lesson's been there. Even there, even when I'm fretting on the D string, you can actually use that first finger maybe where that crease is, to touch the G string, and that's muted. It's just the most unflashy technique is muting. I think everyone wants to play fast, everyone wants to play slap, plectrum, whatever. Who concentrates on muting? Probably not that many people because it's so boring. But that is one of the techniques that will mark you out as a great bass player, is someone who can play notes cleanly. That was what this whole lesson was about. I'm going to leave it there. I could do a follow-up if you want. Just let me know. If you've got any questions, do let me know. If you've made it this far in the video, thanks for watching. Do leave a like, that really helps me out, and I'll see you on the next lesson. Thanks.